Three, two, one, and we are recording. And before I introduce you, before anyone, because I'm a selfish capitalist, Dr. Guillen asked me what is my hoodie. So everyone's seen, I design my own hoodies. I make my own, 8K resolution images. I upload them and then they get printed on. I don't know where they get printed, but they're hoodies. I sell them. That's how I hopefully will fund the podcast. But this hoodie, so I made this one in like 2019, the file, and the file name was literally some high res crap. I just found the highest resolution images I could, and I was just kind of laying them over each other. So there's a moon, there's a high res image of Andromeda. There are like leopard skin. I just went to a website where you could find free 8K resolution images. There's like leopard skin. Right. I think there's tiger stripes. If you look, you can see the dollar bill. It's like a 8 by 12,000 resolution image of like a $1 bill that they use for like anti-counterfeit stuff. They can go in and look at everything. Yeah. And then if you look even closer, you can see that famous painting, that Japanese painting of the waves. You can see that very. So what I wanted to do, and then there's a super high resolution image of a forest. What I wanted to do was I was just overlaying images. I think I was kind of bored one day and I was overlaying them and I was having fun seeing how large I could make the file. It was, because in 8K, it compresses it. But a good file will be like a good 10 megabytes. And I was just like 100 megabytes. So I made the file some high res crap. And then I was like, I'm going to print it. But enough about this hoodie. Dr. Michael Guillen, author of The End of Life as We Know It. Please introduce yourself, sir.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. And I want to just say, when you said you were just having fun in creating this thing, we know now from scientific research that there's a playfulness that is associated with creativity. Mm-hmm. In other words, the more intelligent you are, the more creative you are, the more playful you are. We don't see playfulness in dumb animals, but we do see it in smart animals. So I just listening to your story, that's a beautiful hoodie. And you're not paying me to say that, but it is really. And I just saw the top of it. And I thought that's the moon. And then now, as you pointing these things out, it's really quite beautiful. But anyway, thank you for having me on the show, Tommy. I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and I mean that sincerely. I do a lot of media, but being able to talk to a young person like yourself and just exchange ideas, share our journeys with each other means a lot to me. And so thank you. I was born in East LA. I'm 5/8 Mexican, 2/8 Spanish and Cuban, and 1/8 Austrian. I just found that out not so long. My aunt Alicia said, we're 1/8 Austrian. And I said, oh, okay, well, that kind of explains the light skin.
Yeah.
But I was just this poor kid in East LA. And since the second grade, I had a passion for science and a dream to become a scientist. And that dream took me out of East LA into UCLA, Cornell, Harvard, where I taught physics there for about 9 years or so. And then I got hired by ABC News and I did Good Morning America and a bunch of other shows. And then I had an opportunity to produce a movie, Little Red Wagon. But I think the thing that matters most to me now at this stage of my life, Tommy, is that I was an atheist for most of that time, certainly. Through my first few years of grad school at Cornell, I was a scientific monk, and we can get into that if you want, but I literally just lived, breathed, ate, slept science. That was my number one love in life. I had no social life. I didn't want a social life. But then because of a series of incidents, and again, we can talk about it if you want, I launched into a kind of, I guess, in retrospect, you'd call it a spiritual journey, although I didn't recognize it at the time. I was just asking certain intellectual questions. And little did I know, it led me into Hinduism and then Buddhism and Chinese mysticism and Islam and all the rest of it, Judaism. And ended up finally looking at all the evidence, scientific and otherwise, and decided, what makes the most sense for a scientist is to become a Christian. It was actually the last religion that I explored. I did it grudgingly. I had no interest in Christianity. I felt that it was very anti-scientific. And so why would I explore a religion that hated the very thing I love the most? It made no sense to me. But again, through a series of providential circumstances. I don't think they were accidental. I started reading the Bible, and what struck me was the language that Jesus used. It struck me as very reminiscent of the science that I was learning in the classroom. And again, we can explore all that, but I'm just giving you a kind of a brief introduction. And so today, I'm really excited about exploring the intersection between science and faith. I love science. It still remains one of my greatest loves in life. It has been really kind to me, opened doors like you can't believe. But that intersection where science and the Bible, science and Christianity, science and religion in general just come together, to me, that interstitial space is so fascinating. And so it gets me up in the morning, keeps me up all day. I hope we have a chance to explore it.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I have this podcast now, not anywhere near as long as yours. And I was approached by the people at K-Love, which is a kind of Christian radio network. I think it's the largest Christian radio network on the planet. They've got like 9 million, and then they also have Air One Radio, another 9 million. So I think together they have like more than 15 million people. And I was in Denver visiting my boy. He's a Gen Zer, and I get a call out of the blue from these people and say, "Hey, we're starting a whole network of podcasts, of faith-friendly podcasts." They're not, they're not evangelical. They're just faith-friendly. They're not faith hostile. And we want you to do one on science. And I'm like, really? And they flew me to Sacramento. And the next thing I knew, I was like, okay, I'll do this. Look, I'm way older than you are, Tommy. But one of the things I've tried to do over the years is to stay young, to stay at the cutting edge, and not rest on what I've accomplished, and not, stuck. I don't want to be stuck in one period of time.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people get stuck like in their high school years. They can never kind of extricate themselves from high school, because for so many people that was the high point of their lives. Maybe they were the most popular person on campus, or they were the football captain, or the cheerleading person, and so for them that's where they want to be for the rest of their lives. Well, I don't. I've left my past behind. I'm moving forward. My journey is all about the future.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to talk to you, a young man, a millennial who's going through life, I'm just really excited about our conversation. So the name of my podcast is Science Plus God, not Science and God, because I'm a mathematician. So it's Science plus sign God with Dr. G, and it's weekly, and you can find it on Spotify and all the rest of it. But anyway, all that to say that thank you, Tommy, for having me here. I can't wait to have our conversation.
Yeah. And by the whenever I email someone and I say, hey, a podcast is going to be an hour, that's just like, I have nothing. This is what I do. So just FYI, this podcast can go forever. We don't need to cut it short. But yeah, I was going to say we have very similar stories. I've said it before on this podcast, but I'll give a short summary. I went to private Catholic school my whole life, grew up in a very conservative Roman Catholic family. And around like 15 became pretty atheist. In high school, started reading a lot of Ray Kurzweil, which you mentioned in your book.
Oh yeah,
Singularity is in the air. And I remember this was like 2006. I must have come across like a crazy person. And I was like, there's an exponential curve in technology coming. We're all going to live forever. And they were like, they're probably like, this kid needs to be on a straitjacket in a padded room. And I was like, no, the robots are going to become conscious. It's the 3 bridges of genomics. And it's just like, all right, man. But, and then I went to college, and, after a year of goofing around, I got very serious. And like you said, it's not just that I was pre-med. That's all I did. And when I went to the University of Georgia, which was the biggest party school in the nation. There's 30,000 students, half of which are beautiful women. I went to one football game my entire time there. I drank. I went out to the bars once, maybe twice a semester. Every single day, it was up before sunrise, work out in my room, take a cold shower, meditate, study all day, go to sleep. Walking in between classes, OChem flashcards, just every nonstop, eat, breathe. And I say that looking back on it because now I couldn't do that. But at the time, kind of like what you said, I loved it. I didn't have a social life. I didn't want a social life. I didn't care. It was just
Yeah.
it was all, I was just so obsessed with the science of it. I loved the more you'd learn and they'd start to bleed into other classes and you'd find similarities between molecular biology and literature and I hated the class I hated the most was religions of the world. I was like, I don't like this. This has no, but as I meditated more and more and more, like you said, I slowly found myself moving towards not no, in hindsight, I can see it was a spiritual journey, but at the time I had no idea.
Right.
But I started reading the Bhagavad Gita, and I was like,
Ah.
and I remember reading like a blip about meditation, and this was written how many thousands of years ago, but it was like find a place not too high and not too low, like a deerskin mat, sit cross-legged, close your eyes and like follow your breath. And it's like behind you is like the person, behind the person is the mind, behind the mind is the I, behind the I is the self. What is the self? And I remember thinking, I was like, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Cause I was keeping a journal throughout college and you can kind of see my spiritual progression where I'm like, what is the self? What is consciousness? And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Who wrote this? And then I thought it was like a novel. I didn't know it was like 3,000 years old. I was just, that's how like oblivious I was. I was like, who wrote this? Who's the author? And it was like, oh, this is some ancient text. And I was like, that was the first thing that I was like, okay, so just like math, whether it's today or 5,000 years ago, like you can discover these truths, right? You can just, the gravitational constant you can discover on Earth or in Andromeda. I was like, there seems to be some truths about meditation that on different continents and in different millennia. So that was the first kind of inching towards that. And then obviously losing a brother to suicide, that pushed me to like an existential crisis. But more and more, so finally, I'll finish this rant because I want to talk more about your book. Is um, for my personal statement for medical school. When you apply to medical school, you got to do a personal statement, and then if the medical school deems you worthy, they allow you to fill out a secondary application. You got to write another essay.
Wow.
And I remember writing one for the Keck School of Medicine in L.A. And it was what was the most exciting thing you've realized in the last year? And I think on the note of what you were talking about, I was trying to distill. One day I was meditating and I was trying to just distill reality to its most base form, which again is what a normal 21-year-old does. But and I was like, what is the one theme I've learned in all my classes in every science course? And I eventually came down to wasn't active diffusion and passive diffusion. It wasn't PV equals nRT. It wasn't acceleration. It was the one thing I could conclude from calculus to physics to microbiology to biochemistry was it's the most simple one. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I was like, that's the thesis of physical reality. Now, what's the other aspect? We have physical reality. Now, what's the other half of reality? Consciousness, the one that experiences physical. All else falls into those two camps. So now let's distill consciousness. Going through all these different religions, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Catholicism. I mean, what's the one thing, right? What's the one story they all have? The Great Flood. But what's the base thing? It's almost cliche, right? The golden rule. Do unto others as you'd like to have done to you.
That's right.
And I was like, that's an odd marriage. The one rule of the physical world is basically what goes around comes around. And the one rule of the spiritual world is what goes around comes around. And I put those two together and I said, that was interesting. The dean at the Keck School of Medicine said that was the most interesting personal statement I've ever read. I said, thank you. And then I was promptly rejected from the school. But the point is,
What? Oh, come
but the
on.
point is of that whole rant is I think you and I went through a very similar path to where
Yeah.
finally, I mean, about a year ago, I was just, I slowly realized that my meditations, which I've been doing every day for 12 years, were slowly turning more into prayers.
Hmm.
And after talking to Charlie Duke, the 10th man to walk on the moon, he talked about, what do you do when you come back from the moon? There's no high,
Yeah.
there's no,
Top that.
yeah. With what? Are you gonna make me a fighter jet captain? Like I've done it all. I've walked on the moon. He said that he went through a lot of despair and eventually kind of came to religion. And we had that talk and that, I've emailed him back and forth and he's kind of helped rekindle that faith in me. So a very long explanation short is I think you and I have very similar paths in that I don't think I'll ever be back to traditional Roman Catholicism. but I would definitely say I went from atheist to a little agnostic to full on belief in God. I don't know what God that is. I don't, is it Yahweh? Is it Allah? Is it, the Old Testament God? I don't know, but I do believe in a God again. And that's just very oddly similar to your story.
Yeah. You know, fascinating. And thank you for sharing that with me. No, seriously, because as I was listening to you, Tommy, a few things occurred to me, and that is, and I think it's illustrated in your life's journey and mine as well, that if you begin life by just asking questions, being just a curious person, which we're wired to be, and you just pursue the answers to those questions, I don't think that there is a difference between intellectualism and spiritualism. In other words, I think it's a continuity that if you pursue your intellectual curiosity, inevitably you will find yourself in spiritual territory.
Yeah.
And we make these artificial boundaries, like this is the intellectual territory and this is the spiritual territory, and the two can't meet, or the two are separate, or this one is dumb and this one is smart. I don't think so. I don't agree with that. It's interesting that what you ended up reading that got you into further into the kind of intellectual spiritual journey that you're on, and that is I became very interested after. Well, let me back up by saying I was at Cornell, and I think it was like maybe about the second year of grad studies that I just asked myself a simple question. All right, this universe that I've been studying is just amazing. And so I just wondered, how did it get to be so amazing? Because it didn't have to be this amazing. Even Einstein has this great quote that says, a priori, you would expect the universe to be chaotic. The fact that it's not chaotic, and more than that, it's comprehensible, he called it a miracle. And he said, well, it's either a miracle or it's a really deep mystery. And I agree with Einstein, because as a young grad student, so I would have been in my early 20s, again, just like you, I mean, I just asked myself that question. I was sitting at my desk at the Lab of Nuclear Studies at Cornell, immersing myself in theoretical physics. And I just said, well, it's like you asking yourself, well, what is self? What is consciousness? These are intellectual questions. These aren't spiritual or religious questions like we want to tag them and then somehow demean them or stigmatize them. No, it's an intellectual question. I wasn't a religious person at that time. I was a scientific monk.
Yeah.
I slept maybe 3 hours a day. And that's why your description of, going through the flashcards as you're walking through, I totally get it.
Yeah.
I mean, that was me. 3 hours a day. I usually slept between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. And I even begrudged that. I was actually angry at my own body that I had to feed it, that I had to sleep.
Yeah.
Right? You get it.
What is this madness? Why do I need this primitive fuel? I got to eat oatmeal for carbohydrates. It's like just plug me into a wall. I know. I can tell it's you give yourself into that madness, and it's the most beautiful thing. But
so you're pursuing your intellectual curiosity, right? This is not religious. I'm not talking religion. I'm just asking an intellectual asking a straightforward question. All right, I have studied the universe. I get it. It's truly amazing through and through, from the microscopic to the macroscopic to the astronomical. It is truly amazing. It's not like one of those hollow Easter bunnies that, you look at it and it's foil wrapped. Oh, how beautiful. And then you crack it open. It's like, what? The universe could have been like that. And it wasn't. The more I broke open the universe, the more I studied it, the more even amazing it became. You look at a rainbow and it's beautiful, but then if you start studying the refraction, diffraction, or reflection that makes a rainbow, it's even more spectacular than what it appears to the naked eye. So in asking this question, I knew science offered me answers, very elegant answers in the form of Big Bang Theory and the quantum vacuum and all the rest of it, and beautiful math, elegant math. And I was just in love with it. But as I learned more and more about these theories, I realized they had holes in them. And it was like like, wait a minute, these theories that are being offered to me don't fully satisfy me. Again, intellectually, this is not a spiritual. I didn't recognize this as any kind of a precursor to a spiritual. This was just me being me. This was the nerd being the nerd. All right. And so when I became a little bit dissatisfied that the scientific theories of the day were not fully answering my probing curiosity, my probing, merciless curiosity, because it's really what it is. My curiosity is merciless. And don't stand in the way of my questioning. I'll just bowl you over because I want answers. That's all I care about. I want answers. I don't want dogma. I don't want your opinion. It doesn't matter to me. I just want answers I can hang my hat on, that I can base my life on, so that when I wake up in the morning, I understand what I believe. Because if I wake up in the morning confused, then my whole life is confused. Then what is my life but nothing but a hot mess? I don't want that life. I want a life where I have some measure of understanding of how the universe works and what is my place in that universe? How did I come to be? How did the universe come to be? These are all legit intellectual questions. And so when I became a little bit dissatisfied with the science of its day, with this deep question I'm asking, one of my professors, Carl Sagan, who a very famous astronomer, did the Cosmos series and all that, I took some courses in exobiology from him and from Frank Drake, who are both, considered the fathers of SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Really fascinating.
You took courses under them?
Yeah, I took courses on them, and it was really fascinating because, you really talk about, hey, Tommy, you would have been perfect for this class. You would have been salivating because you said at some point in your life, you asked, what is self? Well, right off the bat I think it was like the very first day of class, Frank Drake and Carl Sagan, stood in front of us, and there was a small group. It was a grad level school. It was a graduate level course. So there were no more than maybe a dozen of us at the most. And they said, okay, today we're going to ask the question that is going to be the theme of this course. And that is, what is life? How do you define life? And it was like, oh my God, I mean, talk about it's a simple question, but it's also the deepest. And I have found that the simplest questions are the deepest. So we spent like weeks talking about, okay, so is a crystal replicating itself?
Is that life? Yeah.
Is that life? Because if one of your definitions of life is that it has to be self-replicating, then a crystal is self-replicating. Yeah. So I mean, we got into this stuff that I'm telling you would have loved. And so anyway, I just remember that at that time, Sagan was getting very, very famous. He was on the Tonight Show. And whenever he was asked about anything that was kind of remotely spiritual or whatever, because he was a secular Jew, so he was raised Jewish, but as very many Jewish friends of mine, they lose their faith, they become either atheists or agnostics. Well, that was Carl. He was a very secular Jew and a cultural Jew, he called himself. And he would, when he was asked about, well, what do you believe beyond the stars and the galaxies you're always talking about? I mean, do you think there's a level of reality beyond even that? And he would start talking about something called the Vedas, Vedas, right? And this was the days before Google, so I couldn't just like, what is he talking about? Let me Google. So I went to Olin Library, the graduate student library on campus. And I thought, well, what is he talking about? I needed to understand. And I found, wow, this is the sacred literature of the Hindu religion. And so, like I've always done in life, even to this day, I just jumped in with both feet and both hands, because I thought, hey, if it's interesting to Carl Sagan, for little old me, I got to understand, why is it so fascinating to Sagan? What is he finding in the Vedas that he's always yakking about it whenever he's asked about religion or spirituality? So I just I explored Hinduism, and it was quite fascinating. I learned a lot. And then a friend of mine, a fellow grad student, gave me a copy of the I Ching, and he said, well, why don't you check that out? And I'm flipping through. I remember it was just this little paperback book, I Ching. And again, it was so foreign to me because I was a scientific nerd. So this was like opening up a candy shop that I had never entered before in my life. Again, I didn't recognize it at the beginning of a spiritual journey. Just like you with your meditation, right? You didn't think but again, where did I cross? Again, that's why I say it's a continuum.
Yeah.
The intellectual journey just naturally, I think, morphs in a continuous, gradual way into this inevitably into this what we call spiritual. But I think the labels we give them is artificial.
It's
All
all
right.
one. It's all one journey. Yeah. At what
It's
point?
all one journey. It's all one coherent journey,
Yeah.
Tommy. And so I started reading Herman Hesse.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember how I first, whether somebody recommended it, but I remember reading Beneath the Wheel and Gold Moon and Narcissus and um, all these other novels by Herman. Have you read Herman Hesse by any chance?
I recognize the
You would
name.
love it. You got to do it, man.
Okay.
It's on Kindle edition.
Okay.
He was a German. He ended up getting the Nobel Prize for literature. He's German. But the thing that I loved about his novels for that stage of my life, when I was in my early 20s, just this hardcore intellectual asking some really deep but difficult questions that science just wasn't up to the task of fully answering for me. And now I'm venturing into this new territory, which for me was very exciting. Didn't leave science behind. I just brought it with me.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like, okay, well, I'm taking this backpack off and I'm putting on another back. No, it was, again, a continuum. His characters, and this is why I think you would love reading him, his protagonists are all intellectuals who at some point become disenchanted with life and even suicidal. And I think, as I recall reading, because at some point I read the biography of Herman Hesse, I think at some point he did actually try to take his life. He became suicidal. And I know at least one character in one of his novels, because only recently I started rereading him. It's really interesting for me to do that after so many years, to go back, because I just had such fond memories. I woke up one day and I'm like, why was I so fascinated with Herman Hesse when I was in my early 20s? And so I got them all. I went to some used paperback because I didn't want to get it on Kindle. I went to some used bookstore and for 50 cents I got
the real, the good stuff.
But his intellectual characters at some point just become despondent with life.
Mm-hmm.
And so they find themselves on these spiritual journeys. And I said, that's me. That's who I am. And it was so vicarious and so romantic. And these characters would meet gurus and mentors in these exotic locations. And I'm like, I want to be that person. I want to be on that journey.
Yes.
And who knows, but that journey has led me to the person that I am today. It's just fascinating, Tommy.
Have you ever read any, he died, actually, I think he died right before I started my podcast. Not that the two are at all linked, but Ram Dass, formerly Richard Alpert, he's friends with Timothy Leary, Harvard scientist in the 60s.
Yeah. I don't know a lot about him, but I do know about him. Yeah.
He went on the journey you and I are talking about. He went on this journey and just never took his foot off the gas. So he does the same thing where he talks about, he was like, I got my PhD primarily out of fear. I went to Harvard. Everybody was proud of me because, he's in Harvard now. And he's like, and I taught with all these guys. And he's like, and he goes, now that I was in one of the inner temples of esoteric knowledge, I thought, we would know, capital N, we would know. And if we all knew, then we should be grooving.
Yes.
And we weren't. We were at dinner parties. Who had the newest Mercedes? Who had the newest Triumph motorcycle? Who had a Cessna airplane? Who went skinny dipping in Nassau? Who went to the best dinner parties in Manhattan? Who were you bumping elbows with? And it was all pinning badges. And I had four departments under me. I had 40 research assistants. They were dangling tenure over my head. And he was like, I'm a Harvard scientist. And he was like, but every once in a while, I would be sitting in my bathtub at night, and when I didn't have anyone else's eyes to look into to tell me how great I was, I knew it wasn't enough. And I was, and he goes,
whoa.
And down the hall from me, he was talking about he worked in the psychiatry or psychology department. And I could almost recite them because he's like, down the hall from me was Eric Erickson, Dave Reisman, Jerry Bruner. And then he goes, and at the end of the hallway in a tiny closet-like room was a fellow that I became drinking buddies with, and his name was Timothy Leary. And and it starts with them going to Mexico. They wanted to just go to Mexico. They end up he says he found Timothy at one point. He got there like a day before him, and he was like, and Timothy was sitting there in the grass looking up at me, saying that he had just eaten some mushrooms he found. And so I ate some. And we learned more about the mind in 7 hours than we had in 27 years. And he goes on to this whole, they start the LSD experiments. He gets fired from Harvard, and he doesn't just stop. He goes, so I go to the Himalayas. So he goes,
Yeah.
he's driving through Iran in like a rainbow colored Volkswagen bus, just driving
Oh
through.
my God.
He's like smoking hashish, looking at like an Islamic revolution through the eyes of a haze. And he goes, eventually I end up in the Himalayas, and every once in a while you'd meet someone else and you could look into their eyes, and their eyes would be saying, do you know? And you'd be saying, no, I don't know, do you know? But no one would say a word. He's like, but you'd meet these young professionals from IBM, from Stanford. They're all these guys that had kind of gone to the highest rung of academia and realized that the answer wasn't there, so they're all where else but like India. And they're out seeing all these temples and stuff, just taking it to the next, it's like the grad school of grad school. And finally he meets this guy, and he's like, a year prior my mother had died. Her spleen got too big and they had to take it out, and she died. And he's like, and I had a very close relationship with her, but it was whatever. And mind you, this is the early 70s. So he's in the middle of nowhere in India. There's no internet, there's no phone, there's no nothing. And he goes and he meets this like kind old man, and he's just like meditating on a hillside. And he goes up and he like, just kind of starts talking to him. And he goes, and I hadn't told anyone about what happened to my mother. No one knew. And even if they did knew, the only people that would know it were like my friends from Boston. Mind you, no internet. And he goes up to this old man meditating, and he looks at me, and and through broken English, he goes, your mother died. And he goes, yeah. He's like, I know these tricks. He's just gonna fish around until he can find something out about me. And he goes, Boston. And he goes, yeah. He goes, yeah, Brigham Young or wherever. And he says, and he looks at me and he goes, spleen.
Wow.
And he goes, at that moment, he goes, I started crying harder than I've ever cried in my life. He goes, you can tell how old Ram Dass is. He goes, because like a computer, when you feed it an insoluble equation and a red light goes off because it's like dividing by zero, he goes, my mind searched for every answer. And he goes, it just ding. And he goes, and that's the moment where I began to wake up. And he goes, at the second moment, I was also terrified because I was also traveling throughout India with LSD. And he goes, for a split second, I thought, I was like, is this guy CIA? Is this all some elaborate ruse?
Oh my gosh.
And he goes, and then he realizes it's not. And he goes, so I ended up staying there for like 6 years, learning all these forms of yoga, all these forms of meditation, the Bhagavad Gita, all this. He comes back to America. He's got this big beard and beads, and he just goes on like a speaking tour for the next 40 years, just all about spiritualism. And I mean, if you listen to some of this guy's talks, it's everything we're talking about, but he just goes to the end, and he's like, what is any of this? I mean, this guy's like yourself, he's a Harvard scientist, and he was like, the end. And then even when he gets into psychedelics, he goes, oh, I thought I found the answer. And he goes, but psychedelics is a lot like, it's a microscope. You can use it to find the answer, but once once you see what's under the microscope, you don't need the microscope anymore. Or another analogy is, use the phone to hear the message, but once you've heard the message, hang up the phone. And he was like, even psychedelics, he was like, LSD was a lot like, it allowed you to go to heaven for a couple hours at a time. It was like the wedding in the Bible. And he was like, you can sneak into the wedding being enlightenment. And he goes, but eventually they'll find you and they'll kick you out, and there'll be much gnashing of teeth. And he was like, so you can sneak into the wedding, but they'll find you. And he goes, and the security will kick you right out. And that's coming down. That's coming down off the LSD. Meeting this guru. It was Neem Karoli Baba was his name. And he goes, I remember talking to Neem Karoli Baba about LSD, and he told me, he goes, why go visit Christ for a couple hours when you can move in with Christ? And that's how he eventually realized he was, and he comes back from the same journey that we've talked about, a hardcore fundamentalist, materialist scientist, reductionism. It's all matter, just cold bumping around in the universe of nothingness, and it will all decay into nothing, to finding psychedelics, to finding Hinduism, to finally realizing he was like, there is no one answer. And he goes back and he talks about like Christianity, he talks about Buddhism. And he was like, Jesus was a groovy guy. He was like, that guy figured, he goes, he didn't have Harvard and IBM, but it was the same thing. Jesus grew up and was like, there's got to be more. And he was like, went on the same thing, grew the hair out, got the sandals. And he was like, but he was like, you go on this long trip. And yeah, I think he died in 2019. He was like 92.
Wow, really? That late?
Man, that guy is he was friends with Timothy Leary. They kind of inadvertently kicked off the 60s. Like,
Yeah, well, his experience was like, as you're describing it, that's the 60s and the 70s. I mean,
yeah,
the epitome.
It is the stereotype.
Right?
It
It
was the
is.
stereotype before it was a stereotype.
As I'm listening to you recounting his experience, and reflecting on what we're talking about, and I really you are a gifted communicator. I have to tell you,
Thank you, sir.
just as an aside, and I mean it, just fascinating to listen to you, and for somebody so young, especially.
Thank you.
The quote came into my head as I was listening to you from Einstein, and he said, any fool can know, but only a wise person can understand. And I think that when you recount your journey, I recount mine, or you recount this one just now, I do think that journey from purely intellectual to then getting into this larger area that we call a more spiritual area. Again, I think those are just artificial labels we get. I just think it's part of one continuous journey. I think we start off just knowing, okay, the Eiffel Tower is this tall, especially in science, we're so into numbers. Okay, well, this weighs 5 grams. This thing is, 32 degrees Celsius. And we're so into quantifying. It's just all about knowing data, acquiring data, piling up data. Now you hear people talking about big data. That's what this world is all about now. How can you crunch all this big data? But I think if you push past that kind of very juvenile beginning of a journey where it's just all about knowing facts, then you start crossing over into, in this continuum, into beginning to understand. And you're describing, that encounter with the old gentleman in the hillside. And as I'm listening to you and I'm picturing it, because it's so easy to picture. It is quintessential 60s, 70s, right? Yeah. That it was an encounter between somebody who knew a lot and somebody who understood a lot. Yeah. It was this kind, right? And it's beautiful because in that journey, that was kind of the crossover point from, just purely knowing to beginning to understand. And even at this stage of my life, I can tell you there's a lot I know, of course. I've spent a whole lifetime just acquiring knowledge, but I have a little understanding, but I'm frustrated sometimes because I want to understand even more. And I wonder, before I exit this world into the next, how much will I really understand? And that's why I like listening. I like listening to you, and I like listening to other people. I tour campuses and I talk to college kids, and it's one of the greatest joys of my life. I go to the University of Maryland, where I got an honorary doctorate from the University of Maryland. It's hanging behind me. And I got to go to the University of Maryland and be with the kids there. And I think it was there because I also went to George Mason University in your neck of the woods and all that. And maybe it was at George Mason, but it was one of those big universities where I was told ahead of time, hey, the secular students group is showing up en masse. They're going to be in the audience. They want to take you on and all that. And I said, hey, that's fantastic. Yeah. Come one, come all. I have a heart for everybody, because we're all on this journey together, and life is a deep, profound mystery, and we're all trying to figure it out. So I have an empathy for my fellow traveler. And that's why even on my podcast, I don't call them podcasts, I call them journeys. And I call my listener fellow traveler, because I just see them that way. I see them as my fellow traveler. I don't see them as my antagonist or them versus, no, we're all in this together, man. And so I remember, I gave my presentation, and then I love the Q&A afterwards, because that's when I get to hear from them. And I love to listen to them. What's on your mind? What's bothering you? What's troubling you? And sure enough, one of the group of the secular students, and from a distance, I could see one, and he had a black hat on, and he had some kind of makeup on, and from a distance, it looked to me like the Joker, like in the movie,
Yeah.
the Batman movie. And I thought, okay, well, that's strange, but that's, that's young
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
I was there, and I looked pretty weird when I was a nerd with a big afro and the
Yeah.
tight jeans, and um, so I don't judge people by appearance. I've learned not to do that. And so he came up to the microphone, and I forget the question he asked, but it was very, not belligerent, but it was very kind of. And first of all, I said, because he identified himself as an atheist, so I began my reply by saying, look, first of all, I really want to tell you how much I respect you for coming here. I said, I don't know if I would have done that if our roles were reversed. Um, to come to a presentation where he knew I was going to be talking about science and God, science and the Bible, science and Christianity. But he showed up, and whatever his intentions were, whether it was to confront me or what, I don't care. But the fact that he would take time from his life to come and sit there and very respectfully listen to what I had to say and then had questions, that's fantastic. That's what life's all about. Ask questions, man. So what happened was, so then I replied to him. And then the Q&A was over, and then I was surrounded by other students who wanted to still ask me more. They usually keep me up like past midnight. I mean, I'm telling you, Tommy,
Yeah.
and it's the joy of my life. I just love it, and listening to their questions. Then we got kicked out of the auditorium. Whoever was in charge said, hey, look, he had the keys. He said, like, you only have this up until midnight. We got to get you out of here. It's a liability issue.
Yeah.
And so they pushed us out. So, but I'm still surrounded by all these atheist students, and well, let's go. So we crossed together across the quad and went to the student union. And I think we stayed up there until, I don't know, 2 a.m. I didn't get back until my hotel room, and then I had to take a flight out the following morning. But I tell you, at the end of it all, Tommy, and this was so delicious for me, because I think for me, this summarizes my whole attitude towards this and how you're supposed to approach life and other people, is that we parted friends. I mean, I would almost say, yeah, we parted. It was just, there was this shift from this kind of confrontation to this collaboration.
Yeah.
So, I don't care what you believe, and I'm not out to convince anybody. I'm a full-time job for myself, just looking out for, what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm a full-time job.
Yeah.
Just asking questions and pursuing answers, that's a full-time job.
Yeah.
I
have
can't,
time to dictate.
I don't
other
have
people.
time to sit here and then I'm going to convince you, I'm going to change it. No, I don't want to change your mind. I want to listen to what your journey is all about. And that's why I love that you began this journey that we're taking together here by telling me what you've been through, because that now becomes part of my journey. I'm now integrating your journey into mine. And that's why I just feel that wherever I go, whether it's on TV, on radio, in person, in the podcast, I just want to share my journey with others for whatever it's worth. Hopefully it's helpful to you. If it isn't, I'm sorry I wasted your time. But I can tell you for certain that your journey will now become part of mine.
Thank you.
It will, because how can I forget your journey? How can I forget what you've been through? How can I forget what you're doing right now? That's important to me. You're important to me. What you've been through is important to me. And it helps to raise even more questions in my mind, which I will then pursue answers to. But as much as I know, Tommy, I can't sit here and say that I'm a know-it-all. I'm not. I don't want to be a know-it-all. I don't want to come across like a know-it-all. I'm in this journey like you are, and I'm further along because I'm just older than you are. But I'm so fascinated with just sharing one another's stories. But I do believe that I want to urge your listener and your viewer, don't just stay in the zone of your journey, that kind of infantile part of your journey where you're just acquiring information and you become like this know-it-all. You become like this encyclopedia of information.
Regurgitate,
right? And you hammer people over with how much you know. Wow, I know this and I know biology and I know chemistry and I know, enzymes and I can tell you the
Yeah.
difference between this and that. Okay. Well, gee, I'm not impressed. All
Congratulations.
right.
Yeah.
Congratulations. You win the Big Head of the Year award.
Yeah.
But I want to urge people, just keep pushing on your journey, push the boundaries, push it, push past your comfort zone, get into that area of not just knowing, but beginning to understand what it all means. Who are you? Why were you born?
Yeah.
What is life all about? Is this just an idle exercise? Are we just two
With a dream.
kind of two meaningless people just yakking it up about meaningless things and that we'll both die and that'll be the end of it?
Just
Really? I
two
don't believe
little
that.
we just two little self-aware blobs of protoplasmic fat just talking to each other on a rock flying around a fusion explosion, and we're patting ourselves on the back because look at my knowledge and you know your knowledge and blah
Yeah.
blah blah, and then we just die and we're no more significant than like pig trough. And is it
Yeah.
that, or is, like you said, it's not just about acquiring more and more knowledge. And I was that guy for a while in college.
Yes,
Well,
me too.
I now know more. I now know more. Bernoulli's principle. And look at this.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
can tell you about physics. And did you
Yes.
know that you blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, sure, it's good. It's good for like a test, like the MCAT. It's good
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I scored this on the MCAT and I got into meta, but you can do that. But there is like another level of like, you know, it's like, it's kind of like what Google is, right? And Google's evil, but I mean, it's a good analogy. Do you just have all the data,
Yeah, that's
or
all it is.
can you index it? Can you become a search engine where you go this and this and this and this, instead of just saying I have 1.3 million results for you? What do they mean? Give
What do
me
they mean?
what is the correct? I can give you a million stories, but it's like, oh, we're going to talk about like Ram Dass today. We're going to talk about Timothy Leary, and it's like you gotta. But then even then, you have to constantly not be okay with where it is. You always, like weightlifting
Yeah.
is, I mean, you can lift a lot, you can, but you got to keep pushing it. And the second you kind of become easy with it, it's time to click up the weights. And you got to be back
Yes.
in that constant
Yes.
state.
Yes.
Of,
Challenge
ow,
yourself.
it hurts.
Yes. Yes.
Push your mind. I mean, everyone that watches this podcast know this. I'm conservative. God forbid, I like Donald Trump. I have on my buddy Ernie, who was born in Mexico and worked in the Obama administration. And he comes on here and we go at each other's throats. But then after about a half hour, you'll find a lot more similar than you do
Yeah.
opposing. And then we always leave just smiling and laughing. And it's just,
Yeah.
I do, when people ask me, how come you have him on? How come you have on a far lefty? I'm like, I do that because I have him on. And after an hour, I realize he's not a far lefty. He's just a competent, respectful guy like me who loves his country, who just happens to see a different route to the same end goal that we both want: a safe society with economic opportunity and a good place to raise children and for our parents to grow old. He looks at it this way and I look at it that way. And we've
Yeah.
become so accustomed to Democrat, Republican, but reality is, but that's not even the point. The point is I have him on and I have on my other more liberal friends because it's very uncomfortable for me and it's recording and I don't edit out. So I'm like, I got to keep my cool. I can't, and sometimes he'll bring something up and then, I'll be like, well, yeah, that's that's a good idea. And he'll be like, that wasn't Trump, Tommy, that was Obama. And I'll be like, well, okay,
Uh-oh.
now I just got served. And you have to own it in real time. You can't change it and be like, well, I'm editing that part out. No, you're sitting here, your face is getting red. You're like, okay, I'm wrong. And but
Yeah.
it forces you to just step out of that comfort zone. So it's not even the whole politics. But it's back to what you were saying. It's don't stay in that comfy little, I know more, I know more, I know more. No, have on someone that completely challenges you,
Yeah.
tears your beliefs apart and cites their sources, and then have to go, okay, all right. Okay, my image isn't right. And then the next
Yeah.
day you're like, okay, now I got to look at the world differently. The game is shifted a little more. I was gonna say your quote about journeys is another Ram Dass Richard Alpert quote is, we're all just walking each other home. And I'd love that quote. And that's what we're all doing in this world. And he was like Hitler and every Jew. He was like Ronald Reagan and every Soviet. He was like, we're just, whether we know it or not, we're all walking each other home. And some of us have different karma cycles than others, but really what we're all doing is we're all just We're all giving each other more information, and we're all going back to like the same guiding light from which we emerged. And he was like, and that's how life is. And yeah, it feels like that's kind of the goal, is just the more, and again, I know, and I even hate doing this because now I'm like pulling out quotes and I feel like I'm just being the big head of,
Yeah.
you're gonna talk to people that all they do is pull out quotes and it sounds
Yeah.
great, but you're like, give me an original thought. And it's
Yeah.
and it's now I
Seriously.
fear I'm doing that. But I mean, like Frank Zappa, all right, a mind is like a parachute, it only works if it's open. It's like, dude, you gotta just second it starts to calcify and solidify. It's like cement in a cement truck, right? It's
Yeah.
always turning. Don't let it
Yeah.
stay still,
Yeah.
because you start to solidify, and I don't even know where I'm going with this anymore. But yeah.
Well, I think this. I'm still dwelling on that quote you gave about we're walking each other home,
Oh
and
yeah.
I think that is very consistent with my own image of
Journey.
all of us kind of being on this. I see it in my mind. I picture it like this dirt road,
Mm-hmm.
and I part of it I think goes back to reading Herman Hesse, where most of his intellectual protagonists were peripatetic. I pictured them
What does that
like
mean?
they were always on the go. They were
Okay.
always on the go, and they were always going to these remote locations, sometimes in India and sometimes elsewhere. But I guess over the years, I just developed this imagery of this journey, but it's not a highway. It's not an interstate highway. It's a winding road. It just goes up and it goes down and it turns left and it turns right. And we're all on this road together. And I just, one of the things that, and so your quote about, we're all kind of walking ourselves home. I think that one of the things that I've learned because over the years, I've interviewed a lot of scientists and interviewed my own share of Nobel Prize winners and gotten to know quite a number of them. And one of the things I've noticed about them, and I'm speaking generally, but it's an accurate generalization, is that there is a wisdom about them. They're not just big know-it-alls. And you would think that, when you go in to interview like a Leon Letterman or the guy who invented the laser, and these are the Nobel Prize winners of physics. That they are the priesthood of physics, and you would think going in to talk with them, sit down and talk with them, they'd come across like these big know-it-alls.
Mm-hmm.
But almost without exception, I have found them to be very reflective, like the kind of conversation we're having. They're aware of the fact that it's not just about knowing. They are people who are far into the journey of trying to understand. Whereas I have found scientists who are very successful but haven't reached that pinnacle of pinnacles, they tend to be the know-it-alls. They tend to be the members of the National Academy of Sciences,
Yeah.
who are very kind of atheistic in their outlook. They haven't quite gotten to the pinnacle. They're not like that old man on the hill, with his legs crossed and has an enormous understanding. And so I just find it interesting, Tommy, that because it's just so obvious to me, having interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of scientists, that there is that difference. I've noticed. You get the know-it-alls, and they're very, they're famous scientists in their own right, and they've gotten as far as the National Academy of Sciences, but they haven't pushed past that kind of know-it-all phase. And so what you find is that among the Nobel Prize winners, they tend to be very religious people, whether they're Jewish or Christian. There are some Muslims and Hinduism, but the vast majority, like 67% of all Nobel Prize winners in physics and chemistry, are Christians. And I've always found that to be really interesting. It's like, why? Because you hear people saying, well, yeah, but Christianity is anti-scientific. It isn't. That's a lie. It's a misunderstanding. But I've seen this firsthand, that those people who have reached the pinnacle of pinnacles, the Nobel Prize level, they don't just know, they understand. And so you find a level of spirituality, a level of religiosity that you don't find in the kind of the wannabes who are right on deck. They're on deck. They're waiting for that phone call from Sweden.
Yeah.
Jumping Yinamini, it's the big one, but right.
Yeah.
And getting that call from Sweden saying you got the Nobel Prize. But it's, the man I taught with at Harvard, Roy Glauber, got the Nobel Prize. And I remember in quantum mechanics, and he was a great guy. He died. Miss Roy so much. And I remember I was filming for the History Channel. I have a series called Where Did It Come From? It was a primetime series on the History Channel. And we were in China, filming in China. And I remember, I think it was Beijing. I had a long day of filming, and I just kind of dragged myself into the hotel room. And I go into the hotel room, and it's kind of sparse, but there's a TV set there. And I just remember I put down my luggage and I turned on the TV set absentmindedly, and I just started unpacking. And what did you know? There's a news report, and there's Roy shaking hands with whoever, the king of Sweden, accepting the Nobel Prize. And he's got his tux out, and I'd never seen him in a tux before. And I'm like, Roy, God, congratulations, buddy. And so I really enjoy now talking to people like you. I enjoy talking to people like those Nobel Prize winners who have gone from just knowing to understanding. I just get exhausted by people who want to impress me with how much they know. It's like, okay, big whoopee. I was there, done that, been there. And I'm in the fourth quarter of my life. You're barely in the first quarter. And I'm just very conscious of how precious time is.
Mm-hmm.
So like when my wife said you invited me to be on the podcast, she knows enough because we get a lot of invitations. Says, well, who is this person and what's their angle? Because I really don't want to waste my time
No, sure.
yammering about stupidities about the latest scientific headlines, because scientific headlines are perishable. I'm interested in things that are imperishable. I'm interested in truth that lasts, that is not like milk or like today's news headlines that are perishable. I want to talk about things that matter now and 100 years from now.
Yeah.
So when somebody sees your podcast 100 years from now, they're going like, wow, that's still relevant. Look at these two guys. They're talking about things that matter. Instead of like, hey, did you see the headlines yesterday? They just discovered a new bacteria, a strain of bacteria. Who cares?
It's just another factoid.
I did that for many years at ABC News. I did all the headlines. I did that for many, many, many years. And it was fun. And I still keep up with all the sciences because science is my love. But I want to be at that intersection. I want to be at that intersection of Ram Dass and the old guy. That's where the sparks are flying. That's where knowing meets understanding. That's where I want to be. Yeah, man. That's where. That's why I enjoy it. And you're so young to have gotten there. So I'm really loving our conversation. So thank you for this. Yeah.
Yes, sir. It's. And I was thinking and I know I said it'd only keep you for an hour, by the way. So if at any point you got to go, let me know.
No,
I've got nothing doing. We can keep going. I'd love to keep going.
Yeah.
I was thinking about what you said. Yeah, there's that level where it's not to beat a dead horse, but it's the person that just regurgitates everything, well, there's this new bacteria and it metabolizes blah, 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 and it's just like, I get it. Like, okay, fine. Yeah. And then there's the person that knows, and it's, it kind of, if everyone I've interviewed, let me find what episode it is. Cause I always get it wrong.
How can you remember? You have what, like 300 and some episodes?
371, but they all stick in, and like I remember weird spots of weird ones. I'll try to.
I think I'm on episode 41 and I have a hard time already. What was it, 13 that I talked about time or whatever? But you're like 300 and some.
Oh no, I remember very like distinct ones. They're kind of like islands. Like I know one with, and I also relate them to different, like, okay, I remember when I interviewed that guy, what I was doing in my life. Episode 82, John Romanello, who's an author. I think he's like maybe 5-6 years older than me. Everyone I've interviewed, scientists like yourself, I think that's the wisest person I've ever spoken to. He's 5 years older than me, and like, you want to hate him. The dude's got a jawline that you could sharpen a diamond on. He's buff. I'm heterosexual, and I look at him and I'm like, man, he's beautiful. He's an author. He's artistic. He's he's someone that you're like, you want to hate him, but he's just. But I talked to him, and by the end of it, it's the only episode I was legit. We were talking about my brother, and I was legitimately in tears, and he had like not laughing. I mean, like, I was like sobbing because I was just realized that's the wisest person I've ever spoken to. And I've talked to, yourself included, some brilliant individuals. And that's a guy who it felt more like he knew, like he understood,
He
and not
understood.
just.
Yeah.
And the thing is I'm sure if you told him that, he would be like, no, it's not me. But what I was gonna say is we're back to what you're saying, the guys that, it's blah 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 blah, the gravitational constant versus the wise man on the hill. Man, there's kind of this beautiful imagery of like a caterpillar going into a cocoon and turning into a butterfly. It's
Yeah.
like there are a lot of guys that are cocooned. They're cocooned in their white
Yeah.
coats and their
Yeah.
PhDs
Yeah.
and their ribbons and their I've got this and I'm this and I'm this. And it's only once they blossom into the
Wow.
wise guy that what do they? I mean, what do they all do? They lose everything except a big robe. They grow their hair out, long beards. They just blossom to where they
Wow.
literally and figuratively shed everything, and they become this new creature that like can't exist in traditional society. If you see a guy walking around barefoot with a beard down to his belly button, that guy can't work at Harvard. That guy can't be at MIT. But the
Yeah.
thing is it's because they've transcended that need. They've
Yes.
turned into
Yes.
these like walking. And then what do they always do? That's when they die. That's you're like it's almost some weird law that like you can't once you reach that level of understanding, whether it's like 33, you could argue Jesus, or whether it's
Yeah.
91, Ram Dass. It's like there's almost some weird self-limiting mechanism to where like you can only know you figure out the game and the universe is like, all right, buddy, you've had enough time on this planet. It's like when you start winning too much money at a casino and the
Yeah.
pit bosses throw you out, you start to figure it out. You're like, oh, this is all just one thing and we all are one consciousness and we're helping each other go home and everything is love and this is all suffering is an illusion. And it's like, all right, buddy, you've had enough to drink, and they throw you out of the bar, and that's when you die, and you're not allowed to know. You're not
Yeah,
allowed
isn't
to know.
that? Oh my God. Well,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Ecclesiastes, which is one of my favorite books in the Bible, actually, because it was written by Solomon, who arguably is, I want to say, the world's first scientist. Because if you recall the story of Solomon, he pleased God at some point, and I forget exactly why he pleased God, but he pleased God for his faithfulness. And so God said, basically, look, hey, you can have anything you want. What do you want? You're just such a faithful person. You have honored me. What can I do for you in return? I mean, I'm paraphrasing. And you would think that Solomon would say, man, I want all the gold in Fort Knox. I want riches. I want fame. I want power. No. You remember what he asked for?
Uh-uh.
He said, I want knowledge.
Ah.
I want wisdom. See, there again, it's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. He said to God, okay, I can almost picture Solomon going like, okay, wow, man, the big guy is asking me what I want. This is like this is
Yeah.
better than hitting the lottery, right? What is it that I want? I want wisdom. It's like, what? What wisdom? What's that? That's not going to put food on your table. So that's why, he acquired this wisdom. And that's why people from all over the world at that time, the ancient world, came to visit him, because he had a zoo and he really taught himself what I see as science. So anyway, why am I telling you this? I was starting to tell you this for a reason.
Um,
Anyway,
metamorphosis, gurus walking around with
yeah.
their
Oh yeah, I was thinking about Ecclesiastes when you said about, you grow up, you're stupid, you educate yourself, you become a know-it-all, and then maybe if you're lucky, you go into that transcendent state of understanding, and then you die.
Yeah, you're
Well,
not
that's
allowed
pretty
to.
much what Ecclesiastes says. He says, and that's why he says, drink and be merry, because you're alive today and then you
It
die.
doesn't matter.
There's a certain depressing aspect of Ecclesiastes, but there's also a certain honesty about it. And there is a lot of wisdom in it beyond that, just, hey, today you live and tomorrow you die. But the thing that I have learned is that there is this hymn, and I only know a fragment of the hymn, but it goes something like, the key part of the hymn that I was thinking about as you were describing about, people grow up, and then I love that whole metamorphosis. They're cocooned in their white coats, but really in the heart of it, they're still that worm. They're still that caterpillar. But if they're lucky, if they push ahead in their journey from knowing to understanding, right, they become this whole new creature. They throw off their coat, their beard, and their hair, and all. I just love that imagery, and I'm thinking of Ecclesiastes, when he says, yeah, and then you die.
Yeah, you can't
But
know. You can't know.
yeah,
You're not
no,
allowed to
but
know.
so I'm thinking of this fragment of him is also kind of crossing my mind, and it goes like this: and the things of this world grow strangely dim in the light of your glory and grace. So the things of this world grow strangely dim in the light of your glory and grace. My wife is talking. Have I got that right, sweetie? In the light of his glory and grace, he's referring to Jesus. And what I'm finding is I'm not growing a beard, and I'm not, my wife, I don't think would like me if I grew a beard, but I think if you left me alone, I probably would.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking at this stage of my life, Tommy, what I'm finding is that, all the rancor and the hatred and the Democrats and the Republicans and the liberals and the this and that, and I hate you. No, I hate you more. No, I hate you more. I hate you first. No, I hated you first. It's just like I'm just tuning all of that out. It's just it's so exhausting to hear people just shouting at each other and one-upping each other, and so all of that is just growing strangely dim in my life. I prefer this. I prefer conversation. And I really just tip my hat to you for
Thank you.
challenging yourself and having that gentleman on who you disagree with politically, but you're challenging yourself, because you that's the only way you grow. If you only listen to people who agree with you, you're never going to grow. How can you grow? People are, Tommy, you're great just the way you are, brother. Hey, buddy, just stay the way you are. I love it. Well, then you're going to just stay who you are. How will you ever have the chance to grow and it's uncomfortable and it's not fun.
No, it hurts.
It's distinctly not fun. But I think that at this stage of my life, I don't want to be a part of that. I remember once, and I think it was like a Nightline, and they asked me to do a story on something that was called the prime use movement. I think that was what it was called. It's out west primarily, where there's a lot of disagreement about how do we use federal land. And of course, the cattlemen out there say, let us graze on the land. It's just sitting there. It's doing nothing. We're not going to harm it. Just let our cattle graze on it. We'll make sure that they don't graze it to death. We can move them around so that the land stays healthy. And then there are the hardcore environmentalists who say no, absolutely, it has to stay pristine. That's like freezing in time. As if we humans are not a legitimate part of the ecosystem. We keep out the people, and so I did the Nightline. You do like a 9-minute setup video piece. And then Ted has 2 guests on typically, who then use the video piece to spur on a discussion, right? So I kind of set up the discussion with my video piece. So I remember sitting in the office at Nightline one morning. We were trying to figure out, okay, well, who are the 2 guests going to be? And so immediately people said, well, let's have Al Gore, because he had just come out with a book. I forget something about the balance of life or the balanced earth or something. He was out there predicting. This was like, you're talking 20 plus years ago.
We have 5 years left.
Yeah, and he ran. He was that was what he was making the rounds in the media, and he was saying, we only have 5 years left. The earth is going to be, well, that was like 20 some years ago, and here we are. And now we have who's a John Kerry saying we only have 9 years left. Oh my goodness, these politicians should stay out of science. I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. I'll stay out of politics. Please, you're making a fool of yourself. Stay out of science. For any intelligent person to say that we have 9 years left. Oh my gosh, it's so embarrassing. But anyway, that's a whole different story. So, okay. Well, let's have Al Gore on, and he can pitch his book and all that sort of thing. Well, who are we going to have as the second guest? So we're like, people are throwing out suggestions, and Ted said, let's have Rush Limbaugh. And we're like, we look at Ted and we're like, Ted, because Ted's liberal. He's very liberal.
Yeah, and then it's Rush Limbaugh, just like the caricature of like the evil Republican.
I know.
We're smoking and worth $1 billion, $1 trillion, and he's in a palace in Florida with a gold microphone. And he's like, the immigrants and the minorities. But yeah,
so I learned something about Ted that day, and he's like you, he has his political views, but he doesn't reside in an echo chamber. He has friends who are very conservative, and he gets along with all of them. He listens to them. He lets them talk. He doesn't interrupt them. He doesn't bash them. He doesn't demean them, humiliate them. And so we're like, there was just like this moment of frozen silence in the staff room when he said, "Well, let's have Rush Limbaugh." And we're like, "Okay, Ted. Well, who says no to Ted, right?"
Yeah.
And I didn't make the immediate connection. He wouldn't have been, I have nothing against Rush Limbaugh, but I didn't make, what does Rush Limbaugh have to do with the environment? I mean, I know he's got very strong political views, but I didn't see I could see the connection with Al Gore because he'd just come out with a book, Earth and the Balance or something like that. And so he said, "Yeah, okay, that's cool." And he says, "Then I'll take care of it. I'll call Rush myself. He's a good friend. I'll book him on the show." And we're like, "Wow, he's even good friends." And it turns out, yeah, they're. But here was a funny thing. So the show aired that night. It was always live at 11:30, and I was in the control room watching it because my piece was the one that set up the whole discussion. And there we entered. Then Ted started here, and we have tonight Al Gore, and then we have Rush Limbaugh. And what was really interesting is that while the camera was on them, yeah, they were debating respectfully. But then when the camera was off and we were on commercials, they were like, "Hey, Rush, how's the family? How's the family doing? How's your daughter?" And I was like, "What?" And oh, hey, fine. Al, how's your wife doing? I was like, and that kind of made me feel good about the world, because today we don't have that kind of rapprochement. We don't have that kind of,
not that we know of,
truce, because I was listening to, I hardly read the news, listen to the news anymore. Truthfully, I'll scan the headlines in the morning and say, "Okay, the world's still in trouble. That's fine. Let's move on." It's the headline it was the same headlines that existed 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago that will be the headlines 3,000 years from now, that the world's in a hot mess. Okay, fine.
Yeah,
they're all each other's throats. That's all I need to know.
Okay, good.
And then I go, and try to make the world a little bit better. But I was listening to this congresswoman, and she says, and the host guy said, "Well, what is it like in the House of Representatives today?" And she says, "Oh, nobody's talking to each other. Like the Democrats aren't talking to the Republicans. They don't want to talk to them. They literally do not want to talk to each other." And I felt a sadness. It's like, wow, how are we ever going to get out of this mess if we just want to silence one another, or if we want to just isolate ourselves and surround ourselves only with people who agree with us? How are we ever going to make the world a better place? And so I feel like when I heard Rush and Al Gore, talking like that in a civil tone towards each other, even though they have, huge disagreements, and they have a right to air those disagreements out in public, but at the end of the day, they were at least civil with each other. Yeah. And here you are, Tommy, carrying on that grand tradition of communicating. Because like I said, I don't judge people by their appearances. I've seen people who were tattooed and, pink hair and earrings all over the place. And, in my early days, I might have jumped to a conclusion about them, that's some flaco hippie.
Yeah.
And then they start quoting the Bible, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What? Wow. Or some rapper, my son loves rap music. And
yeah.
And he was telling Dad, "There's Christian rappers." I said, "Nah, there's no Christian rappers. How can they have, that, like, how can rap and Christian?" And I was listening, and he, he's educated me, and I'm like, whoa. When, you look at him and you're a rapper, you're going to think the worst about him. And so I don't do that anymore. And I just love listening to people. I get messages, as I'm sure you do all the time, from people who read me or listen to me or watch me, and they come up with some great ideas, and they come up with some tough questions. And I just love it, because I always told my kids at Harvard, man, hit me with your good stuff, because I'm not only going to grade you on how well you do in your tests or how well you do in your homework, but how good are your questions? And the tougher, the better. The tougher, try to stump the old professor. Stump the professor. Let's play that. And I would say to them, and if they would ask me a simple little question, I'd say, "Oh, come on, man. Is that the best you can do?" And so when I go out to college campuses and I talk to the kids, I say that with all the love in my heart. I said, "Okay, guys, it's your turn. I've shared my journey with you. now I'm opening it up. Give me your questions, but please make them tough. Toughest again, you know.
I my my probably the best, one of the best, maybe the best teacher I ever had was my sophomore year in high school, Miss Carvis, who who always loved my writing. And I remember you had to, I mean, I was like 15. You had to write from the viewpoint of some some historical figure, and I chose General Paul Tibbets, the pilot of the Enola Gay.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember it was like the night before it was due, and I just wrote like the quickest piece of crap ever. And I tried to doll it up with like vocabulary and blah blah. I remember I turned it in, and at the end of the class, like the next day, I was like leaving. She was like, "Tommy, can I talk to you for a second?" And I came back,
Oh.
and she's like, "So I'm not gonna grade this." And I was like, "Okay." She goes, "Because this is horrible." And I was like, "Okay." And she goes, "If anyone else did this, I would just give them a C, but I know what you're capable of, and I take this as like an insult." And I was like, "Okay." And
Oh.
she was like, "You have 48 hours, write something good."
Oh, good for her.
And I remember I wrote like a 2-page paper about the atomic bomb, and as far as I know, for like the next decade, she used that paper as like an analogy for, she would read it to her class and be like, "This is what you're capable of." Because it was
Wow.
one of the best things I had written. I was, granted, I was like
Wow.
50. I'm sure if I read it now, I'd roll my eyes. But I just remember there was no like, "Hey, you can do better than this." She pulled me aside and she was like, "This is like toilet paper. This is disgusting." And
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
was like, "Come back with like what you're worth." And to
Yeah.
me, that was like just the right enough of like right amount of motivation with like, a
Yes.
little
Yes.
bit of an insult, just enough to like
Yeah. Yeah.
fire
Yeah.
under me, right? Just enough to be like, "Come on, you're better than that." And but yeah, it's what, but to
And
dial
good
back,
for her, by the way. Good for her, Tommy.
I know,
I hear stories about professors who wouldn't be that generous. They would just give you the F and
yeah,
write you off.
yeah. I'm
And
surprised she didn't.
that makes my, there are very few things that make my blood boil, but that makes my blood boil. I'm an educator at heart. I'll tell you, once I was at a men's retreat. It was a Christian men's retreat, and I was kind of still a young Christian. I was still kind of exploring it and didn't totally get it. And, but a bunch of guys, and it was a great location. We were having a good time, and it all ended like on a Sunday afternoon. And the head guy was up there doing some kind of a service. And then he looked out at us guys and he said, "Okay, I have a challenge for you." He says, "I want you to take that sheet of paper that's in front of you there and a pencil and write down what quality do you see in yourself that is Jesus like." And I'm like, I literally like froze. I
It's a
panicked.
big
I was like,
question.
what? And I snuck. I had my cell phone, and I probably shouldn't have done it, but I snuck, and I called Laurel. I said, "Laurel, I'm supposed to write down
Qualities
what Jesus like quality do I have? Like, I'm clueless here." And she said, and she didn't skip a beat. This is my wife. She's so beautiful. She says, "What are you talking about? You're a teacher. You're a teacher. Jesus was a teacher."
Hey.
And I'm like, "Thanks, bye." Boom. I wrote it down. And I've never forgotten that moment because it like crystallized in my head. That's who I am. But people, "Oh, you've been on TV, you've been this and
Yeah,
this and that, and a movie producer." No, no, no. I'm a teacher.
yeah.
That's how I see myself. And so when I hear stories about teachers who just have no mercy, and I'm like, why are you in teaching then? What do you get joys out of giving an F to a student who is capable of better like you? Why would you do that? Why would you demoralize a student? I mean, can you go home and feel good about that? And I've heard stories like that. And I'll tell you, at Harvard, we don't give Fs, we give Ds. That's the lowest grade. So it's E's rather. So it's A, B, C, D, E. Okay. So I can tell you, in 9 years of teaching physics at Harvard, I never gave an E, ever, never once. I never gave a student a failing grade. Um, I gave one D because she really deserved it. I kept giving her chances after, and I can't get into it for confidentiality
Sure.
reasons, but I just kept giving her chance. She would come to my office and she would explain her plight, and I would say, "Okay, well then do it this way." Anyway. at the end of the day, I didn't want to fail her because I didn't want to keep her from graduating. She needed this class to graduate. And so I had to give her a D. But if a student came to me, like I had one student come to me one semester, and I said, where have you been? I mean, you haven't been in class. I haven't seen you now. Like you're coming at the tail end of the semester and you're wondering what you can do to pass this class. I said, first of all, can you just tell me, where have you been? And so he says to me, well, I've been in Puerto Rico because Harvard students, they do these, I forget the exact name, but they're travel guides. And I think they're called the go-to travel guides, or go to Brazil, go to Puerto Rico, go to Hawaii. I think I may have the title wrong, but it's like that, like go-to guides. Okay. Well, he just decided that he wanted to become the editor of the go to Puerto Rico guide, which meant he had to spend most of the semester in Puerto Rico doing research. And I first of all, I said, man, that's really cool. First of all, I said, that's cool. I wish you had just told me.
Yeah.
Instead of just like being MIA from my class. I had no idea. I didn't know if you were in the hospital or what. I mean, come on, man.
Yeah.
Cut me some slack. I do care about you. You're one of my students. I really cared about each of my students. And I said, okay, well, now what can you do? You have like 2 weeks left in the semester. I'll tell you what. I said, and then I can't remember exactly what, but I concocted something where I knew what he liked. I knew what he was good at. I knew what motivated him. And I somehow worked out a special project that combined that with physics. And, you know, and the title of my course was Particle Waves and the Structure of Matter. So we started out by talking about particles, and then waves, electromagnetic waves, acoustical waves, and then we ended up with quantum mechanics. So it was particle waves and the structure of matter, and it was a science A course. So it was absolutely required for the kids to graduate, to pass the class. So I had to come up with something for this kid who's off in Puerto Rico. But I did, and I said, look, if you can do a really good job, I mean, I'm looking for you to do, don't just slapdash, don't do that to me. I'm giving you a chance here to do well in this class, even though you've been absent most of the semester. I get it, I understand. You weren't just goofing off. And he did it, and I passed him. I gave him a good grade, probably like a gentleman's C. At Harvard, we have what's called a gentleman's C. If you at least, do decently, you'll get a C, a gentleman's C.
College try. Yeah.
Yeah, you give it the old college try, but for your teacher to do that for you, Tommy, man, I mean, respect.
Yeah.
I mean, that was beautiful. And look, you remember her name, you're recounting the story, and it's an inspiration instead of saying, and you know what Mrs. So-and-so did for me? She gave me a big old fat F.
Yeah.
And you give me a big old black eye.
Yeah.
That would be a horrible story. Nobody would be inspired by that. So we have a chance in life, I think, to just either add to the world, add to the positivity of the world, or to add to the negativity of the world. When you invite somebody on to your podcast, like that gentleman with whom you disagree, you're adding positivity to the world, because at least you're talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
How can we ever get past this terrible period of time we have if we don't even just talk to each other, respect each other enough to talk to each other? Remember, you're probably too young, but I'm not. I'm old enough to remember when Yasser Arafat was the head of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Okay, you may have read about him. And president after president, US president after president, Jimmy Carter, all of them, they tried to get the PLO to sit down with Israel. So can you guys just sit down, work out some kind of an agreement, Middle East peace once and for all? Can we just have peace in the Middle East? And you know what the sticking point was always? That the PLO refused to even acknowledge the existence of Israel.
Well, yeah, it's like China and Taiwan. You can't even.
So they wouldn't even be willing to go and talk with them, to sit down. Now, the fact that you're willing to sit down and talk to somebody with whom you disagree with, maybe deeply disagree with, that's the beginning of reconciliation. That's the beginning, at least, of civility. We don't even have that anymore. Conversation is the very beginning of civility. If we don't have any conversation, there's no hope for civility. We're just going to be tearing at each other, and that's just not a good thing. So anyway, I just kudos to your teacher. Is she still alive? Do you still keep in touch?
Oh yeah. No, she was
She
like,
must be so proud of you. Does she know you have this podcast?
I don't know.
Oh,
I haven't spoken. No, she was. And when I was in high school, she was in her late. I think she turned 30 when I was a senior. So yeah, she's
okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she's still
Yeah.
alive.
Yeah.
I bet you she's so proud of you.
I don't think she knows this podcast exists. I might
You
have to find her.
need to tell her. No, you need to tell Tommy. Come
Okay.
on now.
All right. I'll make a note of it.
Tommy, come on. For a teacher,
Making a note.
I get emails from my former students. They've been in the White House. They've been in all, and whenever I get it, thank you for telling me. I feel so good because they're still part of they're part of my journey. I care about them, even though I haven't seen them in decades. I still care about them. Your teacher still, and she'll remember you. So Tommy, please.
Okay. I'll make
Would you make it a point? Let her know.
I'm going to make a note of it right now.
Please do, because I know as from one teacher to another, I know that would just be joyful for you to even acknowledge her, to think about her, to take a few minutes of your time to even let her know and to thank her for what she did. I'm telling you, you will make her day.
Okay.
You will. Okay.
I made a note. I'll pass it along to her.
Thank you, Tommy. Yeah.
We can definitely do another episode if you'd like, or we can get into your book right now. If we don't, I know I've kept you for I can go forever. I've done podcasts that are hours and hours long. I don't want to I keep people verbally hostage.
Yeah, no, let's wrap it up for now, because I really think this has been a really nice, instead of going off to another subject, I really feel this is feels like a natural conclusion to what I consider, because I didn't know what to expect, to be honest with you. And, whenever
come on, I'm wearing this hoodie.
No, but you know, when I get invited to all kinds of things, and Laurel does a certain amount of vetting ahead of time, but you never know. But I just had a good feeling about this. But can I tell you honestly, Tommy?
Sure.
You give me hope.
Thank you.
That we can have a better life and a better world. You've been through a lot. You've had more than your share of hardship. But you've managed not only to survive it, you've managed to triumph over it. And now you're sharing the blessings of that triumph with others through this podcast. And you've shared that with me. You've touched me deeply today.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for that. And I want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, because we need more young people like you that will give us hope that we can have a better world than we're experiencing right now. So I just really want to thank you for the time that you've spent with me. I want to encourage you to keep doing it, and I'll be happy to come back to you and talk to you about my book. But for now, thank you. Thank you for being such a thoughtful young man, for not giving up on yourself, not giving up on others, not giving up on this life, and not giving up on this world. It would be so easy for you to do that. But you have managed through thick and thin to develop a worldview, a hopeful worldview. And I want you to keep nurturing that, keep feeding that positive worldview. Okay. Would you promise me to do that?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. And I look forward to the next time.
Yes,
all right,
sir. Thank you very much. And we will. So for everyone that was tuning in, we will get to the book eventually. This was a very long prologue, and we will be getting the book next time.
We'll start right away.
We'll start right away. We won't jump around. We'll leave out Ram Dass. We'll leave out butterflies and Nobel Peace Prize. We'll jump right to it. Chapter 1. We'll go into it.
It's a deal.
It's a deal. We'll but that's what I mean, on a side, that's what I love about this podcast, though, is that, like, I never know. People ask me, they're like, for you, for example, someone might ask me, oh, where do you know Dr. Guillen from? What are you guys going to talk about? And I'll say, I have no idea. I'm not, I know that he wrote this book, and I spoke to his wife. I don't even know what he looks like. Like, that's where I go into these podcasts. And a lot of people don't believe it, but I mean, like, I sit down and I'm like, let's do it. But the reason why is because when you it's almost kind of a reflection of this what we talked about on this podcast, is when you don't say, here's the journey and it's going to be intellectual and then spiritual, or you don't say labels, this is science and this is not, and that's trust the science and get rid of that because that's Christianity. When you just rip off all of that, and then you kind of you wind up the beginning of the podcast and you say, and go, where's it going to go?
That's it.
It just bounces around, and next thing you know, we're an hour and a half in, and we're talking about Rush Limbaugh and Al Gore, like clinking glasses, and it's like no one could have guessed this. I could have never guessed this in a million years. It's just you flip a coin, and you're like, let's see where it goes, but it does keep going, and I think this is one of the more beautiful episodes. So thank you for opening up. Thank you for sharing that, and
It's my pleasure. And that's life, right, Tommy?
Yes, sir.
I don't know what's going to happen 2 seconds from now. So this podcast was a real slice of life. It was real. And again, thank you, my brother. I look forward to the next time. Okay.
Yes, sir. I will email you I got to edit this. I'll email you, and let's set up the next one, and let's discuss the book, because all this aside, the book is fantastic. We just didn't get into it. All right.
I'll call my wife, set it up. We'll do it. I promise you.
Thank you,
I'm
sir.
proud of you. I'm so proud of you. God bless you. You have a beautiful day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tommy.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
God bless.